Hello and welcome back to the Traxion podcast. Today we're going to be talking about our favorite F1 games. Formula One has been in video games for almost as long as video games have existed. Sometimes they're incredible, sometimes they're less than incredible. I'm Justin, and joining me today are two guys who are more than incredible. It's Tom and John.
Hello.
That's very kind of you, Justin. Not sure it's true.
Thank you very much, Justin.
I tried to segue it in really nicely there. Anyway, to kick things off, we thought we would talk about, because there's too many F1 games to jam into one episode. I'm sure there's going to be future episodes where we talk more about F1 games. But what we wanted to do today is to talk about our favorites. But I wanted to start by talking about our very first experiences with F1 games. Me personally, my early experiences with F1 games were very, very short and uninformed as an American. Certainly when I was a kid in the 90s and the early 2000s and stuff, a lot of the games that I played were rentals. And I remember renting an F1 game or two, possibly for PS1, possibly for PS2, possibly for both. But I don't remember what year. I didn't know the drivers even. So I really had no idea what was going on. I played the game, and I think it was, a case of like barely hitting the brakes and stuff like that. I would have been familiar with Gran Turismo at that point. Certainly I would have played Gran Turismo 1 at least before playing that F1 game. But I want to say at least one of the F1 games that I played, I think there was Montoya and Schumacher. I don't know if that means it's 02, maybe?
Early noughties of some sort, isn't it?
Yeah.
Apparently, the mention of Juan Pablo Montoya actually froze Justin on the screen, but we're back. We're back in good now.
I apologize about that for anybody watching on YouTube.
We'll clear it up in the edit. It's fine.
Yeah, they won't even notice. Again, unless you're on YouTube. I really didn't know much about F1 at the time. I remember having fun with the game as a rental, but again, I didn't actually purchase it. I would imagine your experiences are possibly a little bit earlier than that, Tom?
I'm showing my age now and my Formula One nerdism. First of all, I remember a friend of the family's once had one of the Geoff Crammond Grand Prix games. But let's not dwell on those too much because I don't have too many memories at the minute. I'll have to research back into it. So that's a whole nother episode. So really, the first one for me, the first game I owned was just called Formula One. And that was from 1996. And it was on the PlayStation or PlayStation 1. And looking back now, it's not very good. But it had Murray Walker screaming every time you did something. And that, for me, is extra bonus points because I just love his commentary. He was a Formula One commentator, if you're not aware. And so it was like, oh, no, it's Jacques Villeneuve, if you spun off or something like this. And so, that was a pretty shonky game, but it was a really good game. And I think it was developed in the UK, that one. And then from there, in the years following, at some point, there was also some EA games, and then Sony became exclusive. But that game just called Formula One in 96, that's my first memory.
And what about you, John?
Well, my first memory obviously came after that because I wasn't born until after that. But for me, I know. Yeah, I just thought I had to slip that in there. Even though it was after that, it was definitely a very, very young age for me. I mean, Formula One itself is a sport. I know for a fact that I must have been watching it on TV when I was 3 or 4 years old because I was born at the end of 97, but I strictly remember watching the TV and seeing Mika Hakkinen sitting on the grid in his McLaren and wondering why the commentators were saying he was a champion and he was the best, but he was really far down the grid. And I have this very specific memory of this. So I know this must have been 2000 or 2001. So I must have been 3 or 4. But in terms of the games itself, it was actually F1 2005 for me. We have the city of Inverness is my most local city. It's about 45 minutes drive away. And for me, it was a very exciting time. Maybe once every couple of months, we'd drive up to Inverness for the big shop. And for me, the best part as a kid was going to the game store and being able to buy, with my pocket money, 10, 20 pounds or whatever, being able to buy a video game. And I remember picking up F1 2005 for the PlayStation 2. And just the excitement all the way home, sitting in the car, like bursting, shaking with excitement to get this 45 minutes out of the way so I could play the game. And the first time I turned it on, that intro music, Butterflies and Hurricanes by Muse, came on, and it was just the most epic start to a game ever. So that totally got me hooked.
Did you read the insert that was in the game on the way home? That's always what I would do after getting a new game. You read the insert, you read all about it on the drive home.
Absolutely, I knew the ins and outs of the game. I knew the terms and conditions on the way home, or that I could actually read at that age. Not sure, but absolutely, it would always feel like the longest 45 minutes ever. And then you had to. I mean, the worst part was when I bought a PC game, because then you had to install the thing, and it took hours, and that was just so painful. But anyway, that's another story.
I can't believe that your earliest Formula One gaming memory, is 2005, first of all. And then also, you were born after the game I was playing. That was my first gaming memory.
I'm so sorry,
just like to clarify that. I'd just like to clarify that. I didn't play it when it was brand new. I played it, maybe 4 or 5 years later. That's when I first got hold of it. So I just want to get that in there.
Save yourself a wee bit.
Yeah.
Well, we've gotten our first memories out of the way. We'll maybe do a history of F1 games in the future at some point. So make sure you guys tune in for future episodes and that sort of thing. But today we want to talk about our absolute favorites, and I'm going to kick us off with possibly one of the newer choices. We actually don't know what everyone is picking and stuff, but this may be one of the newer ones because it is one of the games that was made by Codemasters, and it's. Unsurprisingly, the one where I peaked on a competitive level in terms of, competition, league racing, esports, whatever you want to call it. And that's F1 2013. I took a long break from Formula One as a sport from about 2002 till about 2012, till the start of the 2012 season was when I got back into it. And I found out that there was F1 2012, the game, and I bought it for super cheap because it was already, months old at that point, I think, when I finally found out that it existed. I only played it initially, like on keyboard against AI, just super duper simplistic, just learning the tracks and the drivers. And, it was part of the getting back into F1 experience for me, F1 2012. But 2013 was when it really came kind of full circle for me. And, I was really focused on league racing. And I was doing YouTube at the time as well. And I was doing YouTube videos on F1 2013. And I was taking it really seriously and all that kind of stuff. And it really was a case of 2013 sort of being an evolution of 2012, but just with a little bit more added onto it. I think one of the big differences was there was no free use of DRS during qualifying sessions. But that's a rule change within the sport. Yeah, that was one of the... yeah, that's how much I played it. I think that was one of the few changes because it was still the same console generation. You still had the KERS that you had to hold down and actually deploy, which I still vastly prefer over just changing ERS deployment mode with a D-pad or something like that, because it really feels like a NOS button or something like that. And I really like the classic stuff, the classic tracks, the classic cars that they brought into it, and that kind of stuff. Did you guys, Tom, did you get a chance to play 2013?
Yeah, you just mentioned something right at the end there, which is crucial for the 2013 game, and that is it had some classic cars, which is really cool. I remember there was a 80s Williams that Mansell drove there, but it had classic tracks to go with the classic cars. And to this day, I don't think that's ever been in an F1 game since, which is a shame. Maybe there's licensing and development reasons for that, but there was certainly some classic tracks in F1 2013. I don't know if you can remember what they were, Justin, but there's at least Jerez and Brands Hatch, I think, which was
Estoril. There was another one as well in there too.
Imola, was it?
Yeah,
Imola was
it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I think you had to pay for those though, but there was at least 2 that came with the game, and that was a really, really nice thing to play and enjoy.
Are they classic tracks, or are they just hard to overtake at tracks? is what it feels like to me.
Same thing, right?
Yeah, I suppose so. What about you, John? Did you play 2013?
It's really interesting that you guys are talking about this, actually, because for me, I guess you could say, Justin, that if we were a two driver team, we're like tag teaming in and out, because I basically checked out of F1 roundabout when you checked back in. I really, really enjoyed some of the early, like 2010 F1 game, which I'll come on to in a wee bit. 2011 for me went a little bit downhill, and 2012 was that point in my life where the F1 games basically got pushed aside and other things came in, like iRacing for me and more kind of sim racing stuff. And I don't know if it was just the timing of it, but I remember getting F1 2012 and playing through the first kind of, it was the young drivers test at Yas Marina, right, which was like the tutorial mode at the time. and I enjoyed it somewhat, but I didn't enjoy it enough to give myself more hours on the game. And the problem was for me in the first few hours I played it, it didn't captivate me enough to drag me away from the sim racing stuff. So what then happened is I didn't buy another Formula 1 game until 2015. So it was, I mean, I have no idea if F1 2013 is as good as you guys say it is, and it's more the fault of F1 2012 and the situation I was in at the time. But before I move on from that, what I would say is I actually went back to F1 2012 years later because I had it in my Steam account. I thought I'll download it and give it a go. And I actually got through a couple of seasons on career mode on it and really enjoyed it. So maybe it was just the timing for me rather than a bad game or anything like that. But yeah, I just missed that era, I'm afraid.
I think you can get burnt out with the yearly releases a bit, and maybe that's what happened to you.
I think so.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that would make sense.
Yeah, and I think my passion in 2012 was heavily fueled by the fact that I was getting back into the sport, and I had such a desire to learn. I remember that Australian Grand Prix, 2012 Australian Grand Prix, really, really well. I didn't see it live. I happened to catch it like as a rewatch or like a video on demand or something like that, essentially. So I wasn't watching it live. I wasn't even on Twitter at that time, so I was not really on social media or anything like that. And I watched it, and I was like, wow, F1 is really different from when I was watching it in 2002 and stuff like that. But for the better, like, I really enjoyed it. It was a Sky F1 broadcast as well, too, that I had watched. So I got to see Crofty.
It was the first year of Sky F1.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So, and it was the first year that F1 came back to America as well, too. Circuit of the Americas, the first race for that track was in 2012 as well. It was also Michael Schumacher's last year as well, too. So it was like this perfect storm of, you know, I didn't really have any other games that I was playing, so I super got into 2012 the game, and I had a lot of free time and stuff, so I was watching every single race, every practice session. I mean, I threw myself in completely, and I love the games. I absolutely love them. Looking back on them, the career mode is pretty shallow. You know, there's no driver movement, which is so weird to think about going back and looking at it. Like, to think that there's no driver transfers, like, how boring is that?
But I mean, that goes on for years though, Justin. Like, that was still the case until very, very recently. So
2019,
it already feels like such a staple of the series, honestly. And it's crazy to think that they ever lived without it, honestly. And it did make it so that the career mode got a little bit stale after 2 or 3 seasons. You know, you could jump in a Marussia or a Caterham and you could get it faster, and you could turn them into a world champion or something in 3 or 4 seasons or something. But it was ultra repetitive, the exact same season schedule every single time. A lot of, you know, and the top teams didn't tend to change all that much. You know, you were fighting against McLarens and Lotuses and all that kind of stuff in 2012. And yeah, so it wasn't the best in the world. And if I'm honest, the online wasn't great from my perspective either. Speaking of 2013, again, my personal favorite, the online wasn't the best for me, specifically racing from the US against a league of mostly Europeans, in fact, entirely Europeans.
What's wrong with that?
And maybe even a South African or two. So yeah, it was really, really weird and janky, and like the cars would warp up and down, and it said that my gap to the car ahead would be negative some seconds, and that it would get more and more inaccurate as the race went on. And yeah, it was just really, really bizarre looking back on it. I mean, it doesn't even seem like a AAA title at this point. The graphics on it were very cartoony back then, 2012, 2013. You know, it didn't have that realism that it has, I would say, ever since 2015. The new generation is when when they kind of turn things around over at Codemasters. It's still kind of a sort of a mix between sim and arcade, but now it's a little bit more towards sim. You know, it leans a little more sim heavy than it.
Authentic.
Yeah, authentic, absolutely. But I really, really liked 2013. I really enjoyed racing online, even despite the weird bugs and glitches that we would have at times. Again, it was sort of the peak of my racing competitiveness, and I had an absolute blast with it. So, but again, 2012 as kind of like a runner up for me, because they kind of lead into each other. They're so similar. They're very, very related. But 2013 really did a good job, I think. And a lot of the problems that 2013 had, I experienced in 2012 as well. So they weren't new problems or anything like that.
I didn't experience those problems online, but maybe it's because you were playing in the US against European.
I think it was. Yeah.
Which
I did play
certain games. Yeah.
I did play against some Americans at some times, and I was much higher up the grid in those races. You know,
right, okay.
I was like a god among men when I was racing against the Americans. It was incredible. I was the one in the open lobbies telling guys, you got to do 1-1 wings. And they're like, what? That's ridiculous. Why would you do 1-1 wings?
Yeah,
and then
that was
I'm just absolutely annihilating them. Yeah. So I was taking the pro strats from the Euro guys and just decimating anyone in North America.
If it was bad enough for Justin racing from North America against people in kind of mainland UK, normal parts of the UK, could you imagine how bad it would have been just in America racing against me in the Highlands at the time? Like, I don't think we would have seen each other on track once, right? We would have just been ghosted everywhere.
Another person that you can look to see a lot of those problems is actually extremely famous F1 YouTuber Tiamat Marduk. He was living in Australia at the time of 2012, 2013. And similarly, he was also racing in leagues against Europeans and stuff. And I think it was even worse for him. The connection between the two continents even further or less stable or whatever it might be. But you can actually see well-documented evidence of those kinds of difficulties as well. So I think we maybe have talked enough about F1 2013 and 2012. I could go on for a lot longer, but
please, Tom, let's just talk about that whole episode. It'd be great.
But Tom, please talk a little bit about your absolute favorite.
Where to begin? I can't choose an absolute favorite really, or I can, and it's a really really boring answer. Because I think the best Formula 1 game today is the current one, 2020. But how dull is that? Oh, this guy, he chose the one that's got all the bells and whistles and it's been refined over 10 years or 12 years or 11 years or whatever it might be. So that's the actual answer, probably 2020, which is lame. But for nostalgia reasons, I'm going to go 2010. And I think the context here is there hadn't been a good Formula 1 game for a long time, since 2006. Mm-hmm. Then there was a long pause, and it came back with a Wii and PSP version in 2009, which, all right,
I've heard about that.
I'm sure did a good job.
He who shall not be named.
Right. But, 2010 was like the first, okay, it's on PC, PS3, 360, and it's like a new start for the game and the franchise. It was by the brand new Codemasters Birmingham studio, so really was all new. And you fire it up, and there was an iconic Ian Brown song, and the menus were reminiscent of Grid, which came a couple of years earlier. And it was the first time playing Formula 1 online. That was a big thing. Maybe you could have done it with some of the PC games earlier, but it was a really well implemented online system. Yeah, there was some jankiness, I'm sure. It was early days of PS3 360, right? So I had a lot of fun playing with friends online with it, but also the career was really cool. You mentioned Marussia earlier and Caterham. Oh goodness, that came flooding back. I think that was later than 2010, wasn't it? But still, really good game. Really enjoyed it. Yeah, it was Virgin 2010? Right. Yes, so the red cars are still there. Thank you. And last couple of points in 2010 would be that the damage model was really good and quite aggressive, which I think they toned down for the later ones. And also, it had this really cool feature where you could get punches almost on the front tires and visibly see it. And if your tires were really worn down, you'd have to box. And the tire deformation was quite advanced for the time. So there were a couple of nerdy things that I remember from the game that were really enjoyable. And I think, John, you've played that game as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely, and it's one of my favorites as well. And if you hadn't mentioned it, I definitely would have, because everything about that game.
It was
No, not at all. I would have stolen it from you. So I think you came first on this planet. Remember, Tom? So that's how it works. I think with 2010, it's a feeling thing, right? When you first launch the game, it is the music, it's the menus, it's like, oh, I'm in the F1 paddock, and I think that F1 was going through a golden era at the time, that even if people don't realize it now, I think in 15, 20 years, people are going to say 07/08 through to 2012 specifically was a complete golden era for Formula 1. And I think the 2010 season, you're having 4 different drivers in the championship fight at the last race, 5 up until that point. It was like, it's a picture, right, of a perfect time in F1. 4 different teams, all of them could win. 3 new teams at the back with new drivers, new variations on the circuits, new regulations, and this brilliant new game that came with it that at the time felt so modern, so aesthetically pleasing. They had the flashbacks, it had that, you know, walking into your motorhome and picking a team. There were so many things about it, and I think after what happened in 2009, it was such an important thing that there was a good F1 game that came out, a really successful one. And yeah, for me, that game holds a lot of memories. So it was really good.
Yeah, it was.
I've heard,
especially of the era, right? In the era was amazing in real life in the game. Sorry, Justin.
I've only heard stories really, and secondhand kind of stuff. Because again, I wasn't into F1 in 2010, in the year 2010, 2011. So not only was I not watching F1, certainly I wasn't watching any sort of YouTube videos about F1 2010 or 2011 or anything like that. So yeah, it would have been completely alien to me. But I did hear kind of secondhand stuff from people. And I heard that 2010 was superior to 2011. I want to say, maybe one of you can speak to this. I want to say that I heard 2011 was too easy. It was just like the car was really, really planted and you could just, you know, take a lot of corners way more aggressively than you could in real life.
I think that it was broken in the way that you could abuse the setup, exploit the setup, I should say. So
that's what it
2011 had an issue where to set up the car well, there was a certain thing you did. You maxed out or put minimum, whatever the settings were. Maybe it was the wing thing that you talked about, plus some ride height, and the car would instantly become like a Mercedes from 2020. So for me, F1 2010 was a lot better than F1 2011 because 2011 didn't for me improve on 2010 at all. It took what it had, and for me, it did it again, but slightly worse. And I think that's not great. But that's just my personal opinion. Lots of people love 2011, but I said 2010 was the best.
We'll get all the 2011 fans in the comments.
Boo.
But I never went back and played. I never went back and played those. And I will say, certainly, those games are not great in terms of like spectating and like content creation and that, you know, that era, the PS3, Xbox 360 era of Codemasters F1 games are not super friendly in terms of, you know, content creation and all that kind of stuff. I think you can mod them all right. It's not, you know, as moddable as like Wreckfest or Assetto Corsa or some other extremely mod heavy games, but I think mods were fairly common, and people were into that sort of thing. I know, wow, taking it back to YouTubers again, but Areva has done a lot of modding historically with F1 games. I don't know if he's modded those in particular, but I know he's modded the Codemasters F1 games on PC. So yeah, it's a strange era that I don't know a ton about, those first 2 years, the 2010 2011 games. But I do know that because I've seen the season reviews, the FIA season reviews, I do know about the season, the 2010 season, and how awesome that was. Yeah. And the four guys being up for it at the final race, and was it Mark Webber was the fifth that dropped out?
It was Button dropped out.
Okay,
yeah, Mark Webber was still in contention until I think Mark Webber was leading into the last race, just ahead of Alonso, and Vettel was third, and then Vettel ended up winning the title because Webber and Alonso both had bad races. But it was Button who just dropped out of the fight a race before the end.
It's all Vitaly Petrov's
and 2011
Alonso's point of view, right?
Yeah, exactly.
He still holds that grudge, I'm sure.
I would imagine.
Which he drove an amazing race. If you watch it, he pitted on like lap 1. Petrov and did the whole race on the one set of tires.
He really did.
And so fair play.
Yeah, it was a good drive. And 2010, or excuse me, 2011 was not a great season, right? So it's almost like the games and the seasons coincide with one another. You get a great season of F1. Apparently, it means a great game of F1 as well, too. I mean, you picked F1 2020 as your favorite. And to go back on that, Tom, by the way.
Yeah, let's cover that.
I've not actually played it in terms of driving. In fact, I haven't driven... Exactly. I commentate on the F1 games like crazy through F1 esports since 2017 now, and just through league racing, which I haven't done these days. Certainly, I can tell you the games have improved massively in terms of spectating and stuff like that. 2020 is much, much better. You can have more spectators than you could in previous years, and it's definitely more esports friendly, which I think has come about because of F1 esports. The team that puts that together, they see what's lacking, and I assume are making suggestions on ways to improve that. Because of course, a better show means more viewers, which means more people wanting to play the game, and more people buying the game and stuff. So it absolutely makes sense to me. But yeah, I haven't actually driven F1 2020, which I think I'm the only one in that. Right? You've actually driven F1 2020, haven't you, John?
Yeah, and I don't know if you're finished. Were you going to make another part? Because I do want to speak about F1 2020.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, I personally think that it's not a boring answer, Tom, because I think it's really true. And I think in 5 years' time, we'll look back at 2020 as a really good game, in my opinion. Because for me, I was doing a lot of ACC at the time and stuff. And when I first started playing F1 2020, I hadn't played one properly in a while, and I was unsure about how I was going to find it. I'd say the first half hour of adapting to the physics were a little bit tricky. But once I actually got used to how the cars drove, I have nothing but praise for that game. Like, the career mode is so immersive. The thing as well, what we talk about it being the newest game with all the bells and whistles, therefore it's going to be good. It's not that simple, because a lot of the time a new game comes out and you say, it's not quite as good as the last one, or this one's a bit disappointing. It's not always as straightforward as that. And I think what 2020 has done so well, and I would argue that this is probably the case over the last 3 or 4 years, is they've continuously got better and better in big chunks. It's not as if they're making one little thing better or one little change that's, it's basically the same game. No, every single game has come on leaps and bounds with a new feature, with improved handling, all those kind of things. And even like F1 2020, it's nailed the classics. The classic cars feel better than ever. The career mode's immersive. It's got my team. It's got driver transfers. Like, it is a genuinely fantastic game. So I totally agree with that.
Yeah, I think it's a great game. I agree. It's not perfect. We don't have classic tracks for the classic cars like you've talked about.
Well,
Vietnam, right?
Vietnam's a classic track, right? Because we might never race there. So you could argue that Vietnam's a classic.
I don't mind Vietnam, but I know people hate that track. So best not talk about that too much. So that's funny. And also things like the track limit penalties online. I don't match real life Formula One driving, so I hope for a future game they look at that. And there's a few other bits and bobs, like it doesn't carry on the Butler and Weber story from F1 2019, which I would have liked in there. But the My Team, as you mentioned, John, is great. What I like about it is that you can still be competitive with a controller alongside a wheel, and it's both good with a wheel and a controller. I know people with sim rigs are rolling their eyes or switching off the podcast, but it's still an important factor to have everybody prioritized and competitive no matter what control type they're using. And there's split screen returned. I know that's only a small thing. Right in time for a pandemic. Woo, when you can't go around people's houses. And they changed the ERS, right? So you can actually use it. You can set it to auto, but you can use it like a push button, power boost, and conserve that energy, which I really like doing towards the end of the race, and then overtaking everybody with the power. So that's a good dynamic on the track as well. So I think overall it's amazing, but I just feel like maybe they've reached the peak with that engine, and we'll see what happens next.
And shout out to F1 2015 for laying the foundation for those big chunks that you were talking about, John. I think, personally, 2015 laid such a good base in terms of like the graphics and the physics that it allowed them to focus on things like driver transfers and the paint booth and custom cars and all that kind of stuff. And I know 2015 gets a lot of slack for being boring as hell, if I'm honest. There's just not a lot going on with it, but it's because they spent so much time on that foundation, that skeleton, that the things going on underneath the skin that you don't really see on the surface. For me,
2014 is like 2014 is like a famous pop star who doesn't have a great voice, but the tunes, it's recognizable. It's played them a million times, and it's always going to sing them the same. 2015 is like a raw talent show competitor that's never had a singing lesson in their life, but this incredible raw talented voice. Maybe gets their tuning wrong half the time, but with a bit of coaching, it'll become amazing. And then it's developed into F1 2020 now, which is like the most incredible musician that's dominating the world. That's kind of how I view it. Because 15 was so bare, but as you say, the groundwork was really good.
They sacrificed that year for the future of the series, and they did a great job.
Yeah, it was completely bare bones, wasn't it? I don't think it even had a proper
no career mode.
Sorts. It just had play a season, right? Yeah, weird, but it was still good to play. Yeah. I also just wanted to rewind slightly, if that's okay, John. I think you mentioned your earliest gaming memory was F1 2005 or 6, right? So that would have been the Sony era. Did you play the PS3 one, the final one before Codemasters took over?
Yes, and it's a really good segue, actually, because I'm sure Justin's probably going to ask me what my pick would be for my favourite F1 game. So
Please do.
It's F1 2006, but I actually didn't play this on the PS3, which was called Championship Edition, right? Because there was like this game was released twice. Yeah. So this game was released twice. There was the PS3 version, which was Championship Edition, which is Tom is referring to, and that was the last version before the Wii 09 game. So there was 3 years for people to play it, which was nice. But I actually played this game on PS2, and honestly, it is probably my favorite F1 game. I think Tia McMardock did a career mode on it recently, where he went back and played this game, and people loved it. And the reason I love it is because it had all the dynamic things that a career mode you want from a career mode. It had competitors breaking down. It had funny little commentary moments. It had oil spills on the track. You could sign up for teams, you could do mid-season transfers, you could be a test driver, all those fun little things that come with a career mode. Obviously, the physics don't really match up too well today, but with a controller, once you get the hang of them, they're okay. And genuinely, the reason I picked this game is because it was just such a fun part of my life, and I got so much enjoyment out of it in the career mode, and you never really knew where it was going to go. It wasn't easy either. It was a difficult career mode to do well in. To try and make your way up the teams. I was a test driver at Toyota, and I got stuck being a test driver for them for over a year, and that was the worst thing in the world. But also, it was that push for me to go quicker in these test sessions and try and move into a second seat at Red Bull or something for the next season. So, that's a game I would definitely like to give a shout out to.
Yeah, I played it on PS3. And,
we love the punishment.
Yeah, I played the PS3 version, and my defining memory is a feature that never came out, which was when they announced it. They were like, "The power of the PS3! We've got the Formula One game. This is great!" And they showed it on stage with like a PSP at the same time. So imagine you're playing a game on your TV on the PS3. You could have somehow connected your PSP, and that would display your rear view mirror. So, yeah, it never happened. But that was a tech demo, so hopefully it's on the internet somewhere. You can look it up. But using the PSP screen as your rear view mirror, brilliant. That's
because who doesn't want to
don't see anymore.
Who doesn't want to look away from the screen while you're playing a racing game? Yeah, let me just see what's behind me.
Brilliant.
Okay, no, I'm back.
Yeah. I'll try and mount
tape
your
it to the top
PSP
of the
above the
TV.
TV. Yeah, exactly. Sellotape.
Oh, that'd be amazing. One thing I have noticed, touching on some of our favorite games, and I noticed this especially when Justin was speaking. You said you got back into F1 real life in 2012, and you loved the F1 2012 game. For me, I got into, as I said, my earliest memory is Mika Hakkinen, but the first time I started being old enough to know what I was doing and actually know that I was watching F1 on the TV would have been 2004, 2005 era, when Alonso started taking over from Schumacher. And then F1 2005 was my favorite game, followed by 2006, which then became possibly a better version of my favorite game, kind of like for you 12 and 13 were. And then 2010, which is my next pick for what would be the best game, was probably just after when I got into F1 at the highest level I've ever been at. So for 2009, I started watching all the practice sessions live on, getting up at 4 a.m. to watch Melbourne practice 1 or whatever it was. And it's like you say as well, it seems that when you really love F1 in real life, it translates to wanting to play the games more. And maybe that's affected our memories of them as well, which I thought was quite interesting because there seems to be a little bit of a correlation there.
They feed off of each other, I think, too, because you come off the session riding that high, that adrenaline high of seeing the race or qualifying or whatever it might have been, even if it's a 4 a.m. practice session, and you go straight into the game, and then you get another high from that, and then the next day there's another F1 thing that you're excited about because you just raced there in the game, and it just spirals out of control because it's much the same for me, and I do think that the games are a great way to learn the sport. Nothing teaches you the tracks like driving them, obviously, even if it's only on a video game, of course, but you still get, the idea of what turn 1 is like, what turn 2 is like, and so on and so forth. And the kind of, the challenges that the drivers are having to deal with at these races and stuff. Not the physical challenge, but the actual, what the track itself and the challenges that it presents. You don't feel the actual G forces unless you have someone pushing on your chest while you're playing or something like that. You don't feel the physical problems that they go through when they're racing and stuff. But it's still that great way of immersing yourself in it and understanding more what it's like for them. And I think it's, when you have a great game, it brings in viewers. And when you have an exciting season, it brings in gamers. You know what I mean? So they really do feed off of each other, like you're talking about there.
Yeah, the best thing for Codemasters is if there's a great Formula One season. I'm sure that boosts sales tremendously.
Yeah, I would imagine so.
Definitely. I totally agree. So. Like when you watch a really good race, you want to redo that in the game. But also, as you were saying, Justin, like if, for example, Vietnam in 2020, I learned that track and I was really interested to know what it would be like in real life. You know, I'd played it, learned the corners, learned the overtaking zones, and then what did I want to do? I wanted to see a Vietnamese Grand Prix because I wanted to know how that would look in real life. You know, would this be the overtaking opportunities I thought it was? How would the cars take this? So there's so many things that are linked and related between the two, which is really cool.
By the way, just to loop back, because we love doing this, we love looping back to something we mentioned earlier. The only complaints that I've really heard about F1 2020, and I think I'm just validating your choice, just like John did, Tom. But the only issues I've really heard with 2020 are from the esports side. The esports drivers are not thrilled with the game. I don't know about leagues. I'm not so ingrained in the league scene these days as I was a few years ago, so I can't really speak to that specifically. But I do follow all of the F1 esports drivers, whether that's Pro Series or the new Challengers that they've got for this year. If you make it to Challengers, I'll follow you on Twitter. It's simple as that. That's one of the side prizes that you get for making it that far. And yeah, I've seen a lot of exactly. I've seen a lot of frustration from the drivers, and it's about like really, really niche stuff like setups and inability to pass. And, you know, there's like set ERS strategies that everybody uses. And if you use anything besides that, then you're going to be suboptimal. You're not going to be competitive. And it just, you know, it kind of makes things a little bit stale. Now they say this, but also it's been the most exciting season of F1 esports challengers that we've ever had. I mean, there's been incredible overtakes and side-by-side battles and stuff like that. So you know, maybe it's a case where I need to actually sit down with somebody and have them explain it a little bit more to me. But it's just that core group of the people that take it the most seriously seem to not be having a great time. But as you said, the career mode is second to none. I know like Luke Smith from Autosport, the journalist, he played the hell out of F1 2020's career mode and just had an absolute blast with it. And it's just so, you know, it's so immersive, and it does a great job of just providing a ton of fun for anybody who's a massive F1 fan like that.
There is one thing I want to add that we haven't talked about at all that really comes to life with F1 2020, and that's the ability of the AI to race you well. Like on F1 2020, it could genuinely, you can have such good battles with AI as if you were racing in the top sim racing league on any game that was taken very seriously. It's funny that we talk about, you know, normally in a game, the AI racing will be a bit less realistic, but when you go and play online and do league racing, the racing becomes more realistic. Whereas in a game like this, where it's got a few issues with the online side of it, but the AI is brilliant, you get the totally opposite effect. So for me, like, I'm a sim racer, but I really enjoyed F1 in a gaming, relaxed, casual gaming context. So I loved playing it offline against the AI with not spending too much time on practicing or setups or anything like that, just having fun with it. Whereas for the esports guys, I guess that it must be a bit frustrating that they maybe can't race others online as well as they can race the AI, because they've done an amazing job getting the AI so good.
I think it's good online. I think it's maybe just the esports people who are playing it every single day to practice it. Maybe you just get that
1,000 hours people.
Yeah, right. I'm not dismissing their complaints, of course, but right, it's different to most people play the game. We're going to talk about our favorite F1 memories, and I think we've actually all decided that Formula 1 2020 is quite good, and we've sort of eulogized about that for half an hour.
And I have to say, the AI wasn't always good. You know, I picked 2012 and 2013 as my 2013 as my favorite, 2012 nearly favorite, and the AI was terrible in those years. I mean, if you get alongside, they're just like, "Oh, excuse me, sir. Sorry, I didn't realize this was your position. Please, after you." I mean, just overly polite. And then in qualifying, you were non-existent. You don't exist to the AI in qualifying in 2013 and 2012. It was shocking. Like, I am on a hot lap and somebody's coming out of the pits. Oh, just going to take the racing line right in front of you. Like,
total opposites the racing.
Exactly. I remember being extremely frustrated, and yet I still picked it as, you know, my favorite game. So I'm willing to accept faults and stuff like that. You know, I don't expect it to be perfect. Yeah. And it's a case of having rose-tinted glasses on and stuff like that. And I don't know about 2005. Yeah. Right, exactly. And I don't know about 05 and 06. I don't know if it's a similar situation, John, where like the AI are actually terrible in retrospect, but yeah, 2013, 2012 are not good years for AI.
Well, what I could say is that it doesn't matter if they're really annoying in qualifying in those games, because you could probably overtake all of them in lap 1 anyway, because you just send one down the inside and they all just go, on you go, sir. I think 2005 there was no qualifying against AI because it was super pole system, so you get it was a 1 lap shootout, and that was awesome to have that, because that was obviously what they used in real life in F1 2005. It was the last season of that, and then 2006 they had the Q1, 2, 3 system. But the AI, I mean, who knows how they stack up nowadays? I honestly can't remember, but what I do remember was having good fun playing those games at the time. So I'm sure it was okay, but I'm sure if you played it now, you'd probably laugh a little bit at it. They were really aggressive in 2006. I remember that as well. They were ultra aggressive. You know, it would be they'd literally take your wheel off if you turned in at the wrong moment and they were there. They would take your wheel off and you'd be out of the race and you'd be fired and demoted to test driver at Toyota. Sad memories.
Well, I do like, if I'm not wrong, we've actually picked completely different generations for our favorite games. PS2, PS3, and PS4. I'm using PlayStations to describe the generations. Oh no,
nice and easy.
Yeah. Yours is PS4.
Yeah, well, mine's kind of 2020, so you know.
Right. Yeah. So we've picked completely different generations for our favorite F1 games, but I think that's gonna wrap it up. Did you guys have anything else you wanted to add in there?
Just want to apologize to the Commodore 64 fans. We haven't touched your console, but maybe another time.
What I do want to add actually is if I'm right in saying this, I think you guys listening to this podcast at home, you'll have just experienced F1 preseason testing. So we're recording this just before F1 preseason testing. So if anyone wants to jump in a TARDIS, fly back in time, let us know how it's going, and we can put some money on the bookies, then that would be great.
That would be very handy.
Well, hopefully testing will be exciting this year. Hopefully the season will be good. Hopefully the game will be good. Hopefully F1 2021 will become all three of our favorite. All three of us will pick it as our new favorite. It'll be that good. That's what we're hoping for. But yeah, that'll do it for this episode of the Traxion podcast. Make sure you subscribe via your favorite podcast service or on YouTube to catch future episodes as they are released. Also, don't forget, join us on social media at TraxionGG across all our different channels, and visit the website at Traxion.gg for all of your racing game news, amongst many other things. Until next time, keep it pinned and have a great day. Bye-bye.
See ya.